On June 23, 2020, the CEO of one of Germany's most valuable companies walked into a Munich police station and asked to surrender. The fortune he had built and 1.9 billion euros that the company said it owned were both about to disappear. I'm John. This is the Quiet Atlas. Today, how Germany's most celebrated fintech became its largest accounting fraud and how it took 20 years, 2 journalists, and 1 CEO's confession before anyone stopped it. Wirecard started in 1999 in a Munich suburb, processing payments for adult websites and online gambling, the corners of e-commerce where mainstream banks refused to operate. By the mid-2000s, a young Austrian named Braun was in charge. He had a PhD, wore black turtlenecks, and pitched Wirecard as Europe's answer to Visa and MasterCard. Wirecard's first critics weren't journalists, they were short sellers. In 2008, a group of investors published a report alleging the company's profits were exaggerated. According to public filings, German regulators investigated, but they investigated the short sellers, not the company. A pattern had quietly formed more than a decade before anyone noticed. By 2018, Wirecard was worth more than Deutsche Bank. The German press called it the country's first true tech champion. It was added to the DAX 30, Germany's elite stock index, replacing Commerzbank. But there was a problem. According to a small team of journalists at the Financial Times in London, Wirecard's numbers had never quite added up. Reporter Dan McCrum had been writing skeptical pieces since 2015. His articles pointed to ghost subsidiaries, fabricated revenue, and a shell game in Asia where most of Wirecard's reported profits supposedly came from. Wirecard responded the way frauds always do. They denied everything. They sued the journalists. They commissioned reports calling the FT's reporting a coordinated short seller attack. And here's where the story turns from financial scandal into something stranger. Germany's financial regulator, BaFin, didn't investigate Wirecard. According to public filings and parliamentary testimony, it investigated the journalists. BaFin filed a criminal complaint against Dan McCrum and his colleague Stefania Palma, alleging market manipulation. Then, in February 2019, BaFin took an unprecedented step. It banned short selling of Wirecard stock for 2 months, the first time in German history any single company received such protection. The signal to the market was unmistakable. The regulator believed the company, not its critics. What few people knew at the time was that police had already raided Wirecard's Asia headquarters in Singapore. The raid happened in January 2019, 1 month before BaFin's short-selling ban. Singapore investigators were following allegations of accounting fraud from inside Wirecard's own staff. Internal documents would later become known as Project Tiger. By October 2019, the FT had published the document that would change everything, an internal Wirecard spreadsheet that appeared to show executives discussing how to fabricate sales. Now I want to pause here, because we know how this story ends, but in late 2019, this was an enormous, profitable, regulated public company audited every year for over a decade by Ernst and Young, one of the largest accounting firms in the world. The skepticism that looks obvious in hindsight was at the time a minority view. Wirecard claimed it processed billions of euros in payments through third-party partners in Asia. The cash from those payments, the company said, sat safely in trust accounts at banks in the Philippines. Under pressure, Wirecard agreed to a special audit by KPMG, a separate accounting firm. The audit was supposed to put the questions to rest. Instead, KPMG reported it could not verify that the trust accounts existed. Wirecard's stock began to fall. Then, on June 18, 2020, the company's longtime auditor, Ernst and Young, made an announcement. The trust accounts in the Philippines could not be located, and the bank confirmations Wirecard had provided to its auditors appeared to be forgeries. 1.9 billion euros, the money that had supposedly justified Wirecard's profits for years. According to the company's own admission 4 days later, the funds probably never existed. Marcus Braun resigned. 3 days later, he turned himself in at that Munich police station. Wirecard filed for insolvency on June 25th. The DAX 30 quietly removed it. But there was a second name on the warrant list. Jan Marsalek, Wirecard's chief operating officer, the man whose signatures had appeared on the missing trust account documents. By the time German police went looking for Marsalek, he was already gone. According to public reporting by Der Spiegel and Bellingcat, he had boarded a private flight in Austria the day before the company's collapse and flown east toward Belarus, and according to Western intelligence agencies, into the protection of Russian state services. Marsalek has not been seen publicly since. He is wanted on an international warrant. He has not been convicted of anything, and his attorneys have not entered a public defense. Everything we know about his location since 2020 comes from journalism and intelligence agency reporting, not from a courtroom. Marcus Braun stood trial in Munich starting in December 2022. The trial lasted 15 months. In March 2024, a Munich court convicted him of fraud, breach of trust, and accounting manipulation and sentenced him to over 8 years in prison. Braun's defense throughout the trial was that he too had been deceived, that the missing billions were stolen by Marsalek and a small circle of executives, and that he, the CEO, had simply not known. The court did not accept this defense. Ernst and Young, the auditor that had signed off on Wirecard's books for over a decade, was banned from auditing public German companies for 2 years and fined nearly 2 million euros. The firm publicly accepted that it had failed. BaFin, the regulator that had investigated the journalists instead of the company, was restructured by act of the German parliament. Its president resigned. The agency's powers to actually investigate accounting fraud were quietly expanded. But the pattern that enabled it didn't disappear with the verdicts. Companies still sue their critics. Regulators still chase journalists in jurisdictions far from Germany. Auditors still sign off on numbers they don't fully understand. The verdicts came, the lessons came. The pattern hasn't gone away, it just got a different brand name. Dan McCrum and Stefania Palma, the two reporters whom BaFin had once tried to criminally prosecute, were eventually cleared of all charges. McCrum's book about the investigation, Money Man, became a finalist for the FT McKinsey Business Book of the Year. I want to be clear about what this story is and isn't. Wirecard wasn't undone by clever hackers or sudden market shocks. It collapsed because journalists kept asking the same question for 5 years, and eventually it became impossible to look away from. The hard part of frauds like this isn't seeing them. It's being right when nobody around you wants you to be. That part is older than fintech, older than the DAX, older than accounting. And it's the part that probably hasn't changed at all. That's the Quiet Atlas. If this helped, the playlist has more. See you next one.